When I gave birth in 1970, there was not really a political conversation about childbirth. Or I should probably explain it a bit differently. The first childbirth classes were being taught, and society thought it was a great idea that we all attend childbirth preparation classes, and they were Lamaze and the Bradley method, which meant that multiple millions of women from the 60s to the 70s attended Lamaze classes taught in every hospital in the United States, probably, and Bradley people paid for it and went to people's homes. I'll tell you where the politics started, which is where our NGO in New Zealand and I have always been trying to talk about. There was this inflection point in childbirth conversation because women have had babies since we've existed. And they've had babies around the world and in every culture, different types of health systems, whether they're traditional health systems or very modern health systems. So childbirth has always existed. So in some ways, there's a political component or a societal component really about it. And what if people known throughout the world? I mean, 100% of pregnant women give birth one way or the other, and we never know what our birth's going to be like. So in some ways, there's no way really to prepare for it. But every culture around the world has ways in pregnancy that women, what they should eat, what they should wear, what they should do, what they should think, because we're trying to prevent problems from happening. That makes sense, the same way that cultures have behaviors around what you do with a baby after it's born. We're trying to safeguard the health and well-being of our babies, and that makes sense. But birth itself, that's been vague because you don't know what's going to be like. And there have been people who have attended births, or women have gone off by themselves, or had babies by themselves accidentally. So the politics is really a social factor, much more than a political factor. It becomes political when you come into the modern world and you have politics around healthcare systems. So if you're in a Commonwealth country, you have a Commonwealth healthcare system. And if you're in the United States, you have a Medical Practice Act. And that has an impact. And the United States has 50 different states. And even though big countries like Mexico has different states, how those states regulate medicine is going to be different. Every country is going to be slightly different. And where do midwives fit into the system? Well, they're either in the system or they're outside the system. They're either trained or they're not trained. So there you go. So what's the training? Well, this is where it started to become political. So in the 70s in the United States, there were lay midwives, Vietnam paramedics, obstetricians, labor and delivery nurses. They were attending home births. And in other countries, home births were attended by midwives that were trained within the system. They were either trained in a direct entry midwifery program or it was a post nursing program. And they were called certified nurse midwives. Okay, so what's the difference? Well, in New Zealand, where our trust is, when midwives pushed for their own training, they didn't want to be a nurse. And curiously, which was interesting, because the politics of it sort of has always been really irritating to me and funny in a lot of ways. So this was funny in a way, because women who wanted to be midwives in New Zealand were being pressured by women who were nurses and said, let's just do a one-year training program. But the philosophy, the politics around midwifery by the late 1980s had changed. So this idea was that midwives are dealing with birth, they're not dealing with medical issues. You don't want them to be medically trained because then they're going to think medically. And so you don't want nurse midwives, you want direct entry midwives, and their training should be autonomous, should have a separate profession, which is fine, have a separate profession, that's not a problem. So in New Zealand, when they separated from nurses, what they did was separated on that nurses were on an 8-hour shift and midwives wanted to give continuity of care to women. So they now give 24/7 continuity of care. And that's where you'll need to listen to the video that I've done on how you support your midwife. because midwives in New Zealand are absolutely bloody exhausted. Because while they thought that giving 24/7 care to women under the ideology that midwives should be all things to all pregnant women, is that women then just suck up their energy and call them day and night for the littlest things. And midwives are obligated by their profession to give women constant attention because they set up a profession to do that 24/7. They're going to give them 24/7 continuity of care. When I got to New Zealand in 95, it was like hitting my head against the wall. What are you talking about? Why do you want to do that? That is absurd, right? The women you're working with are adults. And when we hear people particularly in the natural childbirth, and midwives, some doulas, call a grown woman my mother, they're not your mother, my mothers. No, they're women. They're adult women. That's what you need to understand. And that becomes the politics. Because if you expect an adult woman to be adult responsible in her pregnancy and in birth and move into parenting as an adult, you have to stop infantilizing women as midwives and to some degree as doulas, just because you want to be at birth. So the politics started really because Lamaze and Bradley and Grantley Dick Reed in New Zealand focused their skills on low-risk women assumed to have low-risk births, who, if they learned their skills, could have a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical care. They should have focused on, and this was the first huge mistake, 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth. 100% of pregnant women should be skilled to give birth. We should be elevating the activity of birthing our baby, no matter how we do it, to an activity that we need good skills for. That was the mistake, which meant the politics was not about our being taught, my generation being taught birth and birth coping skills, which dealt with the other part of childbirth, was that women suffered in childbirth, which had nothing to do with a problem, which had to do with pain relief. So we all benefited from the skills because we didn't suffer. We coped better, and our husbands or others helped us cope better. So my generation of fathers and mothers look at birth as an empowered experience because we use skills to cope better, even though many of us were high risk and we all had the assessments, monitoring, and procedures of the day. But because that started the political conversation about low risk versus high risk, it started the political conversation that doing X, Y, and Z would achieve these low risk births, pain-free labors with no medical care. And that became the word interventions, because all the assessments, monitoring, procedures then fell under the word interventions, with the strong implication that they were imposed on women and unnecessary. And that became the political craziness of today. So the badge that women have to wear is, honestly, that home birth is the ideal birth, particularly in water, particularly being instinctive, particularly with your midwife who's supposed to sit in the corner, like Carolyn Flint said, and knit. And you're supposed to instinctively know how to do this and have a great experience and have a good outcome. That's what the ideal birth is. That's the political idea. You should only have listened to positive birth stories. You should only have talked positively to your baby. And everything else falls out politically as basically a failed birth. Stop that. As women, we have to stop this. 100% of pregnant women give birth. We value our baby's birth. When we're skilled, we birth better. No matter where the birth occurs, who is present, our beliefs, our choices, lack of choices, change of choices, or what happens to or around us. When we use skills, we birth better because we take charge of how we respond to our internal sensations and to what's externally happening to us, which we could like or not like. Do you think the women in Syria liked giving birth during the war? How about in Rwanda? How about during that massive tsunami? How about during the floods and the famines? We have to stop this belief that everything has to be positive and rosy and glows. What was the word I was going to use? Have to take the rose-colored glasses off. Birth is what it is, and when we are skilled, we just birth better. So it's all become politics. Obstetrician versus midwife, home versus hospital, interventions versus no interventions. And it goes on in our lives as women. Breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, staying at home, going to work. It's crazy. As women, we have to stop this. We have to stop the politics. And the way we do it is to give a new societal message. And that societal message existed in my generation, which was there was a very high societal expectation that all families attend these first childbirth classes. That isn't going to happen. So the new childbirth societal message has to be there is a very high societal expectation that it is normal and natural for all expectant families to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills in pregnancy that they use throughout the activity of birthing their baby. That should be the message. It's a simple message. It's normal and natural that when we are pregnant, we find skills-based methods. There are many of them, and that we self-learn them. That could mean attending a class. It could mean reading a book. It could mean attending online classes like we have and other methods have. You want to take skills. You want to learn skills. You may also learn information and do a lot of researching on your choice, but it's skills, because the choices you make is not how you behave or how you cope, manage, work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, and feel in control. Choice doesn't give you that. Skills give you that. We as humans thrive on being skilled. You want to be skilled. You want your birth partner to be skilled, to help you cope. Suffering was a massive part of childbirth, bigger than the risks becoming problems. There are a gazillion risks, but there's no generalized risk. If you do not have high blood pressure, if you are not obese, if you do not have diabetes, if you do not have twins, if you do not have a septum in your uterus, if your placenta isn't over your cervix, if you don't have a heart problem, blah, 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 blah. If you can identify your risks, then having skills may reduce or prevent those risks from becoming problems. But suffering was the bigger issue. And when we had skills in the 60s and 70s, women stopped suffering. If we used the skills, and the skills weren't great, and many of us did stop using them because we were told they were associated to achieving a natural birth. And if we had more medical care, we gave up on them. Don't give up on your skills. You're doing the activity of doing it. So we've dragged a perfectly normal life event into a political fiasco, and we have to stop it. We have to have a societal expectation that tells all families, and if you're a birth professional listening to this, you need to tell your family. And how do you do that? It's simple. You meet with them and you say, I respect your choices. It's an activity you're going to do. Here's a handout of the different skills-based methods I know about. Search others. Pick one or more of them. At 24 weeks, we'll put in your notes what skill you learned. You learned breathing. Great. I don't have to know it. You know it. You're doing the activity. At 28 weeks, you learned relaxation. Great. At 32 weeks, you learned At 36 weeks, you learn At 38 weeks, you learn 39 weeks, 40 weeks, Those are all in your notes. So at your birth, if I'm there, I'll know. If someone else is there, they can read in your notes. If you look like you're coping and handling really, really well, we're going to just pat you on the back, both of you, and go, well done. That's what we want. We want skilled birthing families who are coping and managing well. We do not want you to suffer. If you look like you're out of control, we can read in your notes, and someone can say, oh, you learned breathing at 24 weeks. I said I did, but I didn't really. Okay, that's a reality check. We will help you do that. However, if you did learn breathing and you decided, well, I'm having more interventions than I wanted, so I'm not going to use it, we remind you this is your baby's birth. You're doing the activity of birthing your baby, whether you like it or not. Do it, and do it with skills. So this is how we want to deconstruct the politics of birth. Just imagine if we had this societal expectation. It's normal and natural when you're pregnant, you self-learn birth skills in pregnancy, birth and birth coaching skills, and you use them in the activity of birthing your baby. The birth stories would be different. The way families relate to each other would be different. Our society would be different. We need to grow that society. And this is what our New Zealand Charitable Trust is telling you. And what I am telling you after 50 years of being involved in the insanity of this childbirth conversation. Because we had a moment in time back in the 70s where we could have chosen that. Lamaze and Bradley and Grantley Dick Reed's skills weren't great, but they stopped most of the suffering. If the natural birth movement of the 70s and the 80s had recognized that and said, we need to keep evolving better skills for all births, regardless of outcome, then we would not be in the pickle we are now. The natural birth movement dismissed skills. The famous authors dismissed skills. They said birth is instinctive. Women know how to birth. They need to be left alone. This is insanity. We need to be skilled. It's an infrequent, one-off, can't be repeated, life-transforming activity. We need skills to do that activity, and the best people to learn those skills are us, right? Any skill we have, we had to learn. So we have to change this. I'm too old to do this. You have to do it. If you don't do it for your pregnancy, you're doing it for your sons and your daughters.